The stars had watched humanity crawl out of the mud and reach for the heavens. And now those same stars trembled at what they had become. 300 years had passed since the first human ship broke free from Earth's gravity and ventured into the cold emptiness of space. And in that time, humanity had spread like wildfire across a small cluster of systems at the edge of the galaxy that nobody else wanted. The Galactic Council had ruled the known universe for over 2 million years. A coalition of 4,000 species who had long ago decided that order was more important than freedom. And that power belonged only to those who had held it since the beginning of recorded history. They had watched younger species rise and fall like waves against a shore. And they had learned one simple truth that had kept them in control for all those countless generations. Every species could be controlled if you reached them early enough and demanded tribute before they grew too strong. Ambassador Jaketh of the Varan Dominion stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the blue and green world, spinning slowly in the darkness ahead of him. And he felt nothing but contempt for the creatures who called it home. The Varan were ancient and proud, their scales gleaming with the wisdom of 1,000,000 years. And Jaketh had performed this duty hundreds of times before for hundreds of primitive species who thought they were special until they learned the truth behind. His vessel stretched an armada of 500 warships, each one capable of reducing a continent to ash. And this display of overwhelming force was called a diplomatic escort in the polite language of the Council. Zikth activated his communication array and sent the standard greeting to the planet below, informing the humans that he came bearing the great honor of the tribute proclamation, and that they should prepare their leaders to receive the Council's generous terms on Earth. In the ancient city of Geneva, Premier Elena Vasquez received the transmission in the Grand Hall of the United Terran Assembly, where representatives from every human colony had gathered to witness this historic moment. Elena was 63 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen humanity through 3 colonial wars and a plague that nearly ended their expansion into the stars. And she had not risen to lead her species by being afraid of anyone or anything. She read the terms of the tribute proclamation carefully, her face revealing nothing as she absorbed each demand that the Council had prepared for humanity. 40% of all resources extracted from human territories would be sent to the Council forever, and human military forces would be integrated under Council command and used. However, the Council saw fit every human being would submit to genetic registration so the Council could track and monitor the species, and all human culture and education would follow protocols approved by the Council to ensure proper respect for the galactic order. These were not negotiations or suggestions. They were commands delivered with the expectation of immediate and grateful acceptance. Ambassador Jaketh transported down to the assembly hall with an escort of 12 Oran warriors, each one standing twice the height of any human and covered in armor that could withstand plasma fire. He looked around the chamber at the gathered humans and saw exactly what he expected to see: small, soft, fragile creatures with short lifespans and primitive technology, who had somehow stumbled into space without understanding their place in the universe. The Voron ambassador activated his translator and addressed the assembly with the same speech he had given to countless species before them. "You have been noticed by the Sci-Fi Galactic Council," he declared, his voice echoing through the hall. "And this is both an honor and a responsibility that you must accept with humility and gratitude." He explained that every species who wished to exist peacefully in the galaxy paid tribute to the Council, and that this arrangement had maintained order and prevented chaos for longer than humanity could possibly imagine. "You have 7 solar cycles to prepare your formal acceptance," Chath continued, "and your tribute payments will begin immediately afterward, as they have for every species who came before you and every species who will come after. He waited for the usual response, the fear, the desperate questions about whether terms could be negotiated, the eventual resignation as the primitive creatures realized they had no choice but to submit to powers far beyond their understanding. Premier Vasquez stood slowly from her seat and walked toward the towering alien. Ambassador, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the chamber as every human representative held their breaths. She was small compared to the Varan, barely reaching the middle of his chest. But something in the way she moved made Keth's scales prickle with an unfamiliar sensation. Ambassador, Elena said calmly, I want to thank you for traveling all this way to deliver your message in person. And I want you to know that humanity has carefully considered the Council's generous offer. Jiga's massive head tilted slightly as he studied this tiny creature who showed no fear in her voice or her posture. And he wondered if perhaps the translators were malfunctioning, or if humans simply lacked the intelligence to understand their situation. The Council requires no consideration, he replied. Only acceptance, as has been the way of things since before your species learned to walk upright. Elena smiled. And there was something in that smile that made the Varan warriors shift uncomfortably in their armor. I understand, she said. And I appreciate you explaining the situation so clearly. But I need to ask you one question before we proceed. Jikef spread his arms in a gesture of patience, certain that the human was about to ask for mercy or extended deadlines or some other pathetic attempt to delay the inevitable. What is the frequency for your official council communication channel? Elena asked. I want to make sure humanity's formal response is properly recorded in your archives. The ambassador provided the frequency without hesitation, pleased that the humans were at least showing proper respect for protocol. And he watched as Elena turned to face the assembly hall one final time. Every human colony was watching through quantum-link broadcast. Billions of eyes fixed on their premier as she prepared to speak the words that would determine their future among the stars. Elena Vasquez took a deep breath and felt the weight of human history pressing down on her shoulders. Every war survived, every plague overcome, every extinction event defied by stubborn creatures who refused to accept that they were supposed to die. She thought about her grandmother who had survived the resource wars, and her great-grandfather who had been among the first colonists to leave Earth, and all the countless generations before them who had fought and bled and refused to kneel to anyone. The transmission channel opened, and Premier Vasquez spoke humanity's answer to the Galactic Council in a voice that carried across the stars. We have received your terms, she said, and humanity's response is ready. Ambassador Jiketh leaned forward eagerly, his translator prepared to record the acceptance speech for the Council archives. Elena looked directly into the alien's eyes and smiled. Our answer will be delivered shortly, she said, and I suggest you inform your council to listen very carefully, because they will only hear it once. She turned and walked back to her seat as Jiketh sputtered in confusion, and the assembly hall buzzed with whispered conversations as humanity waited to learn what their premier had planned in orbit above Earth. The Varan Armada held position and watched, unaware that everything they believed about the universe was about to change forever. The assembly hall had never been so quiet in all of human history, and every representative sat frozen in their seats as they waited for Premier Vasquez to speak the words that would shape their destiny. Ambassador Jiketh stood at the center of the chamber with his warriors flanking him like statues carved from obsidian, and his confidence had not wavered despite the strange behavior of these primitive creatures. He had seen species try to delay the inevitable before, and he had watched them all eventually bend their knees and accept the tribute that the council demanded, because there was simply no other option in a universe where power decided everything. The quantum link broadcast connected every human colony to the assembly hall, and billions of people watched from worlds scattered across the edge of the galaxy. as their premier rose from her seat once more behind Elena Vasquez. A massive display screen flickered to life and showed images from human history. The first tools carved from stone, the first cities rising from the dust, the first ships sailing across endless oceans toward unknown horizons. Wars scrolled across the screen, terrible and beautiful in their destruction, and plagues that killed billions only to see humanity rise stronger from the ashes each time ice ages had tried to freeze them into extinction, and asteroids had darkened their skies, and still they had survived and grown and reached for something greater than themselves. Lena watched the images flicker past and felt the spirits of every human who had ever lived standing behind her in that moment. And she knew that she was not just speaking for the people alive today, but for everyone who had ever refused to surrender. Ambassador Jeff activated the official council recording channel with a gesture of his clawed hand, and the red light of the recorder blinked steadily as it waited to capture humanity's acceptance for the archives. "The Galactic Council is listening," he announced proudly, "and your words will be preserved for eternity as a testament to your species, joining the great family of civilized worlds." Elena stepped forward until she stood directly in front of the towering alien, her head barely reaching his chest. And she looked up at him with eyes that held no fear and no hesitation. "For 2 million years," she began, her voice carrying across the hall and across the stars, "you have demanded tribute from every species you encountered, and for 2 million years every species has accepted because they believed they had no other choice." Kath nodded with satisfaction, pleased that the human understood the history and tradition she was about to become part of. "Today," Elena continued, "humanity gives its formal response to the Galactic Council, and I want every species in this galaxy to hear what I am about to say." She paused and let the silence stretch across the void of space, reaching every corner of the galaxy, where ears were listening and translators were working to capture her words. "Humanity's answer is this," Premier Vasquez said, and her voice was calm and clear and absolutely certain. The entire galaxy held its breath. No. One word, just 2 letters, the simplest response imaginable. "Ambassador." Jeff stood perfectly still as his translator processed the sound, and then processed it again, and then processed it a third time, because surely there had been some mistake. "I do not understand," he said slowly, his scales rippling with confusion. "Please repeat your response." "No," Elena said again. "That is our answer, and it will not change no matter how many times you ask." The Voron ambassador made a sound that his translator could not convert into human language, something between a laugh and a choking gasp, and his warriors shifted uneasily behind him. "This is not possible," Jaketh declared. "In 2 million years of galactic history, no species has ever refused a tribute, because the word simply does not exist in this context." Elena smiled, and that smile contained all the defiance and stubbornness that it carried humanity through every crisis they had ever faced. "It exists now," she replied. The assembly hall erupted in noise as human representatives jumped to their feet, some shouting in triumph and others crying with fear at what their premier had just done. Nishkith raised his arms and his warriors stepped forward, their weapons humming with energy, and the hall fell silent once more as the aliens reminded everyone of the power they represented. "You do not understand what you have done," the ambassador said, and for the first time there was something other than contempt in his voice. "The council does not accept refusal, and the consequences of your foolishness will be severe beyond anything your primitive minds can imagine." Elena did not step back, and she did not look away from the alien towering above her. "I understand perfectly," she said. "You came to our home and demanded that we kneel, and we have given you our answer." She gestured toward the display screen behind her, which now showed images of the human fleet hidden throughout the solar system. Thousands of ships that the council had never detected. Weapons that human scientists had spent 2 centuries developing in secret. We knew you would come eventually, Elena explained. Every species in this galaxy talks about the tribute, and we decided long ago that we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. Ambassador Jeth stared at the images of human warships and felt something cold crawling through his ancient blood. Something he had not experienced in over 300 years of service to the Council. This changes nothing, he insisted, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Our fleet above your world could destroy you in hours, and the full might of the Council would reduce your colonies to dust. Elena nodded slowly, as if she had expected exactly this response. Then go tell your Council what we have said, she replied. Bring their fleet and their threats and everything they wish to throw against us. And I promise you this, we will be waiting. She leaned closer to the ambassador and spoke her next words quietly, so that only he could hear. We have studied your history too, she whispered, and we know that the Council has never faced a species that truly wanted to fight, because you always reached them before they were ready. Her smile widened. We are ready, Ambassador. Jeth gathered his warriors and strode from the assembly hall without another word, his mind racing with questions he did not want to ask and fears he did not want to acknowledge. As his ship rose from Earth and rejoined the Armada in orbit, he ordered an immediate return to Council space, and he began composing his report on what had just happened in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council. On a world at the heart of civilized space, High Arbiter Morath received the transmission and watched the recording of the human Premier speaking her single word of defiance. He watched it 40 times, searching for any sign of bluff or desperation or the fear that should have been there. And he found nothing but absolute certainty in the small creature's eyes. Morath was old, even by the standards of his ancient species, and he had seen empires rise and fall across the millennia like sandcastles beneath the tide, but he had never seen anything like what he saw in that human's face. For the first time in over 1,000 years, High Arbiter Morath felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Doubt. He turned to his advisors and spoke the words that would set the galaxy on fire. Summon the Council, he commanded. All 4,000 species must gather to decide our response. He looked back at the frozen image of Premier Vasquez on his screen, and her silver hair and her calm smile and her eyes that seemed to stare directly at him across the vastness of space. The humans have said no, Morath whispered to himself, and I fear we may have finally found a species that means it. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council had not seen a full assembly in over 800 years, and the massive hall groaned with the weight of 4,000 species gathered beneath its ancient dome. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy had answered the summons, traveling through wormholes and hyperspace lanes to witness what many believed was impossible. A species had refused the tribute, and the Council had to decide what to do about it. High Arbiter Morahad sat upon the throne of ages at the center of the chamber, his withered body supported by machines that had kept him alive for longer than most species had existed. And he watched the chaos unfolding before him with tired eyes. The Kreth Axe delegation had been screaming for blood since the moment they arrived, their insectoid bodies clicking and hissing as they demanded immediate extermination of the human threat. We must crush them now, Commander Vrex of the Kreth Axe shouted, his mandibles spraying venom with each word. Before this disease of defiance spreads to other species, who might forget their place. The Kreth Axe were warriors bred for conquest, and their fleet alone numbered in the tens of thousands, more than enough to reduce every human world to molten rock. Other species nodded in agreement, their representatives adding their voices to the call for war. And the chamber filled with the sounds of 4,000 different languages, all saying the same thing. The humans must be punished, but not everyone agreed. The Illuminth delegation sat quietly in their section of the chamber, their crystalline bodies pulsing with soft light as they processed data and calculated probabilities. They were scientists and scholars, the keepers of knowledge for the entire council, and when their speaker finally rose to address the assembly, the chamber fell silent to hear their words. "We have analyzed the human species extensively," the Illuminth representative announced, their voice carrying the harmony of 1,000 minds speaking as one. "And our assessment is clear." A holographic display appeared above the center of the chamber, showing images of humans going about their daily lives, working, laughing, raising children, growing old and dying in what seemed like the blink of an eye. Their lifespans averaged less than 100 solar cycles. The Illuminth continued. "Their bodies are fragile, easily damaged by temperature, extremes in physical trauma, and countless diseases that target their inefficient biological systems." The chamber filled with sounds of amusement and contempt as species who lived for thousands of years watched these mayfly creatures scurrying through their brief existences. "Their technology is primitive compared to any council member," the Illuminth added. "Their weapons are crude, their ships are slow, and their understanding of physics is laughably incomplete." The holographic display changed to show military comparisons. Council warships towering over human vessels like mountains next to pebbles. Estimated threat level, negligible. The Illuminth concluded, "We recommend a standard compliance enforcement action with minimal council resources, as the humans pose no significant danger to our forces." Commander Rex clicked his mandibles in satisfaction and turned to address High Arbiter Morath directly. "The analysis is clear," he declared. "Send my fleet, and I will deliver you the human surrender within 7 solar cycles, along with the heads of their leaders, as a warning to any other species who might consider similar foolishness." The chamber erupted in cheers and calls for action. 4,000 species united in their certainty that this minor inconvenience would be dealt with swiftly and without mercy. But in the shadows at the far edge of the chamber, one delegation had not spoken. The Mathari were the oldest species in the council, so ancient that even their own records did not reveal when they had first achieved sentience, and they rarely participated in debates that they considered beneath their concern. Their representative was a being of mist and memory, their form shifting constantly as if they existed in multiple moments of time simultaneously. And when they rose to speak, the chamber fell into absolute silence. "We have seen this before," the Mathari said, their voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Long ago, we faced a species like the humans." Morath leaned forward on his throne, his ancient eyes fixed on the shifting form of the Mathari speaker. "What happened to them?" the High Arbiter asked. The Mathari's form rippled with something that might have been sorrow or fear or a combination of emotions that younger species could not understand. "They nearly ended us," the Mathari replied. "They were from a death world like the humans, a planet so hostile that every moment of existence was a battle for survival. And they did not understand the concept of surrender." The chamber stirred with unease, but Commander Vrex laughed his clicking laugh and waved a dismissive claw. "The Mathari speak of ancient history," he declared. "Whatever threat existed millions of years ago has no relevance to these primitive humans today." The Mathari turned to face the Krethax commander, and something in their shifting form made Rex take an involuntary step backward. "The planet was called Earth," the Mathari said, "classified as a death world of the highest order, home to apex persistence predators who evolved to outlast anything that threatened them." The chamber exploded with noise as species began shouting questions and demands. But the Mathari continued speaking as if they did not hear the chaos around them. "We recommended that the planet be avoided forever," they said. "We warned that any contact would lead to catastrophe, but our warning was not heeded then, and it will not be heeded now." High Arbiter Morath raised his hand for silence, and slowly the chamber quieted. "What do you recommend we do?" Morath asked. The Mathari's form solidified for just a moment. And everyone in the chamber could see something ancient and terrible looking back at them through eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. "Leave them alone," the Mathari said. "Except that there is one small corner of the galaxy that does not belong to the Council. And pray that the humans are content to remain there." The silence that followed was broken by Commander Vrex's harsh laughter. "The Mathari have grown cowardly in their old age," he declared. "They see shadows where there is only dust. And they fear creatures who could not defeat a single Krith-Axe warrior in combat." Other species joined in the laughter. And the moment of uncertainty passed as quickly as it had arrived. High Arbiter Marath looked at the Mathari representative one final time, and for just a moment he considered heeding their warning. But the pressure of 4,000 species demanding action was too great to resist. "We will vote," Marath announced. "All in favor of compliance enforcement action against the human species." The chamber lit up with affirmative signals from every delegation except one. The Mathari abstained, their form already fading back into the shadows as they retreated from a decision they knew would bring disaster. "The vote is nearly unanimous," Marath declared. "We will assemble a fleet worthy of the Council's dignity and deliver a lesson that the humans will never forget." He gestured to his admirals and began issuing orders for the largest military action in 800 years. 12,000 warships from dozens of species would converge on human space. Enough firepower to crack planets and boil oceans. A force so overwhelming that resistance would be unthinkable as the chamber emptied and species returned to their homeworlds to prepare for war. The Mathari representative lingered in the shadows and accessed an ancient file that had been sealed for 2,000,000 years. The file contained a single entry, written in a language that predated the Council itself. Classification: Deathworld. Category: Omega. Species Identifier: Apex Persistence Predators. Notable characteristics: extreme adaptability, pack hunting behavior, capacity for sustained violence beyond all recorded parameters. Recommendation: avoid at all costs. Additional note: they do not surrender. They do not forget. And they do not stop. The Mathari closed the file and watched through sensors as the Council fleet began to assemble. Thousands of warships gathering like storm clouds before a hurricane. "We tried to warn them," the Mathari whispered to themselves. "And when this is over, we will remember what we have forgotten." They looked toward the distant edge of the galaxy, where Earth spun in the darkness. And they felt something they had not experienced in millions of years. Pity, not for the humans, for everyone else. The Council Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, like a swarm of metal locusts blocking out the stars. 12,000 warships from 30 different species, united in their mission to teach humanity the price of defiance. Fleet Commander Jivan of the Varan stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed the darkness ahead with supreme confidence, his scales gleaming in the light of the distant yellow sun that humans called home. He had commanded fleets for 300 years and had never known defeat, because defeat was simply not possible when the full might of the Council was brought to bear against primitive species who did not understand their place in the universe. "Scan the system," Jivan ordered, and his sensors swept across the planets and moons and asteroid fields of human territory. The results made him laugh. A deep rumbling sound that echoed through the bridge. "They have abandoned the outer system," he announced to his admirals. "Their defensive platforms are offline, and I detect only a handful of ships near their homeworld." The other commanders shared his amusement, their confidence swelling as they realized that they, humans, had apparently accepted the inevitable and chosen not to waste their lives in pointless resistance. "Perhaps they have finally learned wisdom," suggested Admiral Crix of the Kreth-Axe, her mandibles clicking with disappointment. "Though I had hoped for at least some entertainment before their surrender." Jivan guided the Armada deeper into the system. past the frozen outer planets and through the asteroid belt that circled the inner worlds. Like a ring of broken promises, Earth grew larger on his view screen. That blue and green sphere that had dared to speak the word that had never been spoken. And he imagined the terror that must be gripping the humans as they watched his fleet approach. "Open a communication channel," Jivan commanded. "I wish to offer them one final opportunity to submit before we begin the destruction of their civilization." The channel opened, and Premier Elena Vasquez appeared on his screen, sitting calmly in the assembly hall, as if she was waiting for a routine diplomatic meeting rather than the annihilation of her species. "Fleet Commander," Elena said with a polite nod. "We have been expecting you." Jivan was surprised by her composure, but he assumed it was simply the numbness of despair that sometimes overtook lesser species when they finally understood the hopelessness of their situation. "You see the fleet before you," he declared. 12,000 warships carrying enough firepower to reduce your world to ash. And I offer you this one chance to surrender unconditionally and accept the tribute you foolishly rejected." Elena smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Jivan's scales prickle with sudden unease. "I appreciate the offer," she replied, "but I think you misunderstand the situation." "Fleet Commander," she gestured to someone off-screen. And suddenly every alarm on Jivan's flagship began screaming at once across the asteroid belt. Thousands of objects that had been classified as dead rock suddenly came alive. Stealth platforms powering up and revealing weapons that the Council had never seen before. Human ships appeared from nowhere, emerging from hiding spots in the shadows of moons and the depths of gas giants. And they were not the primitive vessels that the Illumines had described in their reports. These ships were fast and deadly, built low and sleek like predators evolved for hunting. And they moved through space with a grace that made Council vessels look like bloated cargo barges. "You walked into our home," Elena said, her voice calm and cold. "You threatened our children and demanded that we kneel. And now you will learn why that was a mistake." The first wave of human ships struck the Council fleet like lightning bolts hurled by angry gods. Their weapons cutting through shields that were supposed to be impenetrable and hulls that were supposed to be invincible. Shouted orders as chaos erupted around him. His admirals screaming for support as human fighters swarmed their vessels, and human warships appeared from every direction at once. "Impossible," Admiral Crix shrieked across the communication channel. "Their weapons should not be able to pierce our armor. How are they doing this?" A human ship rammed into her flagship at full speed, both vessels disappearing in a bloom of fire. And Jivan realized with horror that the humans were using their own damaged ships as weapons rather than surrendering or retreating. "They are insane," he whispered, watching as human pilots flew directly into the engines of Council warships. Sacrificing themselves to take their enemies with them, the battle raged for hours. And with each passing moment, Jivan's confidence crumbled a little more. The humans did not fight like any species he had ever encountered. And they did not follow any rules of warfare that the Council recognized. They used every trick and tactic imaginable, hiding ships behind debris fields and launching ambush from the shadows of planets and jamming communications so that his admirals could not coordinate their response. Worse than their tactics was their ferocity, a savage determination that went beyond anything Jivan had witnessed in 3 centuries of war when their ships were too damaged to fight. They rammed the nearest enemy vessel and detonated their reactors when their weapons ran dry. They boarded Council ships and fought hand-to-hand in the corridors. Tiny humans against warriors 3 times their size. And somehow the humans kept winning. Most disturbing of all was the sound that came across the open channels whenever human ships attacked. They were laughing, not the desperate laughter of creatures who had lost their minds, but the joyful laughter of predators who had finally found prey worthy of the hunt Sivan sent increasingly. Panicked reports back to the council as his fleet was torn apart. Piece by piece, they used their own bodies as weapons, he transmitted, his voice shaking. They board our vessels and fight with blades and bare hands. And they do not stop even when they are mortally wounded. Another explosion rocked his flagship, and he saw a human ship diving straight toward his bridge, the pilot grinning through the viewport as flames engulfed her vessel. "They are not retreating," Javan screamed. "They are not surrendering. They are not behaving like any species we have ever encountered." He barely escaped a collision, his flagship limping away from the battle as more and more council ships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. 18 hours after the battle began, the greatest armada in council history had been reduced by 60%. 7,000 warships destroyed or disabled by a species that was supposed to be primitive and weak. Svan ordered a retreat, gathering what remained of his fleet and fleeing toward the edge of the system. But the humans did not let them go. They pursued the council ships like wolves chasing wounded prey, picking off stragglers and damaged vessels, refusing to let their enemies escape without paying the full price for their invasion. Only 4,000 council ships made it to the hyperspace jump point, less than a third of the force that had arrived with such confidence just hours before. As Zehevan prepared to jump to safety, his communication array crackled with an incoming transmission. Premier Vasquez appeared on his screen once more, and behind her he could see human commanders celebrating their impossible victory. "You came to our home," Elena said, her voice carrying across the void like a death sentence. "You threatened our children, and you learned what happens when you corner an apex predator." She leaned forward, and her eyes held no mercy. "Now we are coming to yours," she declared. "You have 7 solar cycles to deliver your formal surrender." The transmission ended, and Jivan jumped his battered fleet to hyperspace, carrying with him the terrible knowledge that everything the Council believed about the universe had been wrong. The humans had hidden 80% of their true military strength, and the force that had just devastated the Council Armada was only a fraction of what they could bring to bear behind him. In the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, human salvage ships were already at work, collecting technology and weapons and anything else that might be useful in the battles to come. Premier Vasquez watched the Council fleet disappear and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning to address her commanders. "Begin preparations for Phase 2, she ordered, "and send a message to every human colony." She smiled, and it was the smile of a species that had been underestimated for the last time. "Tell them the hunt has begun." Nexus Prime had been the heart of the Galactic Council for 2 million years, a world of impossible beauty where the greatest achievements of 4,000 civilizations were gathered and preserved. For eternity now, that ancient world trembled with fear as 50,000 human warships emerged from hyperspace and took up positions in perfect formation around the planet. High Arbiter Morath stood at the window of the Grand Chamber and watched the human fleet blocking out the stars. And he understood at last that everything he had believed about the universe was a lie. The Council had always assumed that power belonged to those who had held it longest, that age and experience would always triumph over youth and ambition. And that assumption had made them blind to the truth. Humanity had hidden not just their military strength, but their very nature, presenting themselves as primitive and harmless while quietly preparing for the day when they would no longer need to pretend. Panic had gripped the Council since the first reports of the battle reached Nexus Prime, and species that had demanded tribute for millennia were now begging for protection from creatures they had dismissed as insects. The Krethax fleet had been mobilized to defend the homeworld, but their commanders had taken one look at the human armada and refused to engage. "We are warriors," Commander Vrex had said. not suicidal fools. And we will not throw our ships away against an enemy who has already proven they cannot be defeated by conventional means. Other species had attempted to flee, their governments abandoning the council and racing toward the edges of the galaxy in hope of escaping the human advance, but the humans were not conquering or destroying the worlds they passed. They were simply ignoring them. Their entire fleet focused on one destination and one purpose. They wanted the council itself. Morith turned from the window as the doors to the grand chamber opened and the Mathari representative drifted inside like a ghost from ancient history. You were right, Morith admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We should have listened. The Mathari's form rippled with something that might have been sadness. It would not have changed anything, they replied. The council's arrogance was written into its very foundation, and this day was inevitable. From the moment we first began demanding tribute from species we considered beneath us, Morith slumped in his throne and felt the weight of 2 million years pressing down on his ancient shoulders. How do we not see them for what they were? He asked. The Mathari approached the central display and activated a presentation that had been sealed since before the council existed, because we erased our own history, they explained. We removed all records of the Death World species that nearly destroyed us 2 million years ago. And we convinced ourselves that the tribute system would prevent any species from ever growing strong enough to threaten us again. Images appeared on the display, showing a world of fire and ice and endless violence where creatures fought for survival every moment of their existence. Earth was classified as a Category Omega Death World. The Mathari continued, the most hostile environment for intelligent life ever recorded. And the species that evolved there were shaped by that hostility into something we had never encountered. The display showed humans hunting in the ancient forests, running for hours across vast plains, surviving wounds that would kill any other species in the galaxy. They are persistent predators, the Mathari said. They do not have the strength of the Krethax or the technology of the Illuminth or the lifespan of the Voran. But they have something far more dangerous. Morith leaned forward. What? He asked. They never give up, the Mathari replied. They evolved to chase their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion, and they carry that instinct in every cell of their bodies. When a human decides to accomplish something, they simply keep trying until they succeed or die. And even death only stops them temporarily. An alarm sounded through the chamber as human ships began descending through the atmosphere of Nexus Prime, not firing weapons, but landing in formations around the Grand Chamber itself. They have come to deliver their answer in person. Morith whispered. The doors to the chamber opened once more, and Premier Elena Vasquez walked inside with an escort of human soldiers, who moved like predators entering a den of prey. She looked around at the ancient hall where 4,000 species had ruled the galaxy since before her world had cooled from molten rock, and she smiled at the assembled representatives who cowered before her. High Arbiter Morith, Elena said, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. I told you we would be coming, and I always keep my promises. Morith rose from his throne and descended the steps to stand before the human leader, his ancient body trembling with fear and exhaustion. You have won, he admitted. The council is at your mercy, and we await your demands. Elena studied the alien who had ruled the galaxy for so long, and she saw something she had not expected to find: genuine sorrow and regret hiding beneath the fear. The Mathari told you the truth, didn't they? She asked. Morith nodded. They warned us, he said, and we did not listen, because we had forgotten what it meant to face a species that refused to be controlled. Elena turned to address the entire chamber, her voice reaching every species gathered to witness the end of their empire. For 2 million years, you demanded tribute from every species you encountered, she declared. You crushed civilizations before they could grow strong enough to challenge you. And you convinced yourselves that this was the natural order of the universe. She paused and let her words sink into the hearts of 4,000 species who had never questioned their right to rule. But you made a mistake. Elena continued. You forgot that the universe does not care about your traditions or your power or your belief, that you deserve to control others simply because you existed first. She gestured to her soldiers, and they stepped back, lowering their weapons in a gesture that made no sense to the assembled representatives. You expected us to demand tribute, Elena said, to take your resources and subjugate your people and become exactly what you were. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that the council had never seen before. Compassion? We are not going to do that. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs as species tried to understand what the human was saying. Humanity does not want to rule the galaxy. Elena explained. We did not fight and bleed and sacrifice our children so that we could become another version of the council. We fought because we believe that no species should be forced to kneel before another. She walked toward Morith and extended her hand in a gesture of greeting that the alien did not recognize. We are offering you something the council never offered anyone else, Elena said. Partnership, equality, a chance to build something better than the empire you built on fear and tribute. Morith stared at the human's hand as if it were some kind of trap, unable to comprehend why a species that had just proven its ability to destroy everything would choose mercy instead. Why? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena's smile softened. Because we remember what it was like to be small and afraid and alone, she replied. Because our history is full of empires that demanded tribute, and every single one of them eventually fell. And because we know that true strength is not measured by how many species you can force to kneel, but by how many you can convince to stand beside you. She kept her hand extended. The word no is now part of your vocabulary, Elena said. Any species that wishes to leave the council may do so, and any species that wishes to stay must do so as equals, not as masters or servants. Marth looked at her hand for a long moment, and then slowly, carefully, he reached out and took it. And if we ever try to demand tribute again, he asked. Elena's grip tightened just enough to remind him that the soft hand he was holding belonged to a persistent predator who never gave up and never forgot. Then we will teach you another human word, she said, and her voice carried a warning that echoed through the chamber like thunder before a storm. Extinction. The word hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall, and every species in the chamber understood exactly what it meant. Elena released Morath's hand and stepped back. The choice is yours, she said. We can build something beautiful together, or we can finish what you started. The galaxy's future depends on which path you choose. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her soldiers falling into formation behind her, and the representatives of 4,000 species were left to contemplate the Vankovachin Pater. The representatives of 4,000 species were left to contemplate the end of everything they had known in the years that followed. The Galactic Council was reformed into something new, a true partnership of species who stood as equals rather than masters and subjects. Humanity took no seat of dominance. They simply existed among the stars as friends and allies to those who treated them with respect, and as nightmares to those who did not. In the archives of Nexus Prime, humanity's file was updated with a new classification that had never existed before in the history of the Council. Threat. Level. Maximum. Recommended response. Partnership. Additional note. Do not provoke under any circumstances. And beneath that, someone had added a final line that would be remembered for as long as the galaxy existed. They offered us mercy when they could have offered us extinction. Let us never forget the lesson they taught us, and let us never give them a reason to teach it again.